Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was the bodyguard of Azula. Naruto is banished from Konoha, but gives them the slip and boards a ship. Soon after, he is shipwrecked on Ember Island and is saved by Azula. 3 years later, Naruto is Azula's bodyguard while she hunts for the Avatar, but did he see the last of Konoha? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 57, Rising Tensions and High Bids. Location, Penthouse Suite. Everyone was silent as they looked at Naruto. Are you absolutely sure about that, Naruto? Anko asked him. They had expected to go up against only one member of the Akatsuki. Having 2 members there changed the whole thing. He scowled at her. Do you really think I would make something like that up, Anko? He asked. I heard it straight from Nozomi's mouth. Both Kisame and Kakuzu are coming to the underground auction. Why the hell would Kisame be coming to it in the first place? Suigetsu demanded. He could understand why Kakuzu would be there, looking for big bounties to go after and kill, but he didn't know why Kisame would be there. That is, until he remembered that the remaining swords were going to be there as well. He's going to try and get the swords himself, isn't he? He asked in growing dread. The thought had come across my mind, the blonde admitted. If Kisame got the swords, it is likely he could try and form a group of missing nin capable of using the swords. If that happens, 5 of the 7 swords would be under his control and by extension, the Akatsuki. Chojuro finished what the blonde was thinking. It was a horrifying idea to have the swords be used in such a way. They belong in Kiri and they were supposed to serve only Kiri. That was the idea the Kiri team set out for, to bring the majority of the swords back. This could be a problem, Saka muttered as he thought over the situation. He had been collaborating with Jiraiya with the plan making when it finally came time to take Kakuzu out, but with Kisame in the picture, they would have to possibly come up with a completely new plan. Are you kidding? This is a bonus, Reimu declared with excitement. With him here, we now have a chance to recover all of the missing swords, including Samahata. They could all understand his reasoning, but they also knew that wasn't the main reason he was excited. He was more excited about the fact that his uncle was going to be there, well within killing range. That may be, but you have to remember that we weren't expecting him to be here, Jiraiya told him pointedly. This puts us in a completely different predicament. Maybe we should abort? Karen suggested. She wasn't trying to be a coward, but she did know when it wasn't a good idea to be around. A good example to her was when Orochimaru was on a streak in his experiments. No. Reimu shouted, startling everyone with the volume of his voice. We may not have another opportunity like this ever again. We know the location of the missing swords, each and every one of them. And you would just let them go? There are some things that are worth more than the swords, Reimu. Chojuro reminded him. Please remember that if Kisame is trying to create such a group, he'll want all 7 of the swords. If he finds out that we're here, he's going to make a beeline right at us. That's a risk we'd have to take. He argued. You're not fooling us, Reimu, Suigetsu told him with a roll of his eyes. The only reason that you want us to stay is because you now have a chance to go after your uncle, that's it. So what if it is? He asked with a growl, turning to face him. Now that the seduction part of the mission was over, his hatred for the Hozuki clan member was back in full force. Yes, I want to kill my uncle, is that what you want to hear? Our mission is to recover the swords, not go after Kisame, Chojuro reminded him sharply, his face set in a slight scowl. I know that. He sighed with exasperation, annoyance, and frustration. Why aren't you listening to me, Chojuro? We have a chance to recover all the swords. The 7 shinobi swordsmen of the mist would be to full strength in no time at all. I am listening, Reimu. But you're not focused on the swords. You're focused on your uncle. If you're not on point, you will not be any help to us. And if you're not going to help, you might as well leave us right now. The look on Reimu's face said that they would have to drag him away if they wanted him gone. Pardon me for interrupting the argument, June spoke, getting everyone's attention. But what's with the all fuss? One sting from Nyla's tongue and he'll be paralyzed just like any other. I don't know if Nyla will be enough to stop him, June, the wielder of Hiramakari, I told her. He wasn't called an Oomotenai Biju, tailed beast without a tail, for just his ability to use Samahata, his own chakra, is immense. It's possible that he'll be able to use his chakra to either make himself be able to move or to get rid of whatever poison your Shirsha has. That title is both a contradiction and an insult to a proper Biju, the Kyuubi commented from inside Naruto. How the hell can someone be a tailed beast if they don't have a tail? Am I the only one who's seeing that little tidbit of information? The blonde couldn't help but laugh at what the fox said. Even though he tried to stifle the laugh, the others still heard him. Is there something you find funny, Naruto? Jiraiya asked him. It's nothing, my tenant's complaining, that's all, he replied with a small shake of his head. That's real mature of you, Naruto. My tenant's complaining, the fox mimicked his voice, making it sound a little higher pitched than it actually was. You're one to talk about maturity, he retorted silently. Who was the one either laughing his furry rear off or critiquing me when I was in the club tonight? Oh, come on, you have to admit the bodacious blonde comments were funny. Not when they're about me, they aren't. He really didn't want to remember all the comments that the fox had spoken while he had been on stage, but they were coming back in full force. If I want to laugh at a blonde, I'll listen to Ino when she's hot for someone. So, you do listen to what they say, the Kyuubi said in triumph. I knew it. The fox, like the rest of his team, had been urging him to reacquaint with the Konoha teams. It was he who finally started the process when he goaded the blonde to help Sokka win a shogi game against Shikamaru. Oh, shut up! He mentally yelled at the Biju. It's not business of yours if I choose to be around them or to stay separate from them. Of course, it's my business, I'm inside you. And quite frankly, you trying to avoid the Konoha shinobi is getting a little more than annoying. Would you please just be friends with them again already? This hovering in between being friends with them or not is getting old. He was about to retort when an idea came to mind. Guys, we've been thinking about Kisame's abilities as well as unconsciously thinking that we'd have to fight him and Kakuzu together. What if we just separate the two of them? He suggested out loud. The people in the suite fell silent as they all thought it over. That actually could work, Anko admitted. There was a bit of a risk to the plan, a little more than the usual amount of risk involved in a plan, but if they pulled it off, they might have a chance of killing them both. The Konoha teams had the information on the two members that were going to be there, it was just a matter of sharing it and figuring out who fought out. You're welcome, the Kyuubi told Naruto, knowing full well that it was his words that gave the blonde the idea. I thought I told you to shut up, he silently replied. The important thing isn't if we can split them apart, it's how we do it, Sokka pointed out. We're going to have to do something a little complex than the old switcheroo if we want to fool them. Maybe not, Azula replied. We have 3 groups here and the 2 Akatsuki members are probably here for different things. If we entice them, we could separate them. And how do we plan to do that? Yugo asked her. Kakuzu goes after targets that have high bounties and Kisame is probably here for the swords. But they both have a mission to capture Jinchuriki and bring them back to their HQ. Great, and here I thought I was done being the bait, Naruto said with a groan, covering his eyes with his hand. The action made his muscles stretched, giving the ladies a bit of a show, of which Azula appreciated very much. Look at it this way, you won't be seducing them, Sokka remarked. That's a point to him, Jiraiya commented. Nobody really paid attention to the comment, they had just gotten that used to the whole point thing. Besides, it won't just be you there, Naruto, Reimu told him. I'll be there too, auctioning for the swords. That sentence made both Suigetsu and Chojuro look over at him. Whoa, hold on, what do you mean I'll be there too? Suigetsu asked him. If anyone's going to be there with the blonde, it'll be me or Chojuro. But I have to be there. He protested. I have to be there so I can see Kisame with my own eyes. Oh, is that the excuse you're going to use now? Before he knew it, Remo had grabbed him by the shoulders and slammed him into the nearby wall, pulling the kunai he always fiddled with and held it up against his eye. I have a right to be there, Suigetsu. He yelled. I have a right to look that bastard in the eyes as he dies. I have the right to stab him to death with this fucking kunai. They could all tell that if he could, he would do it with no hesitation. Jiraiya, Anko, and Naruto all had a brief flash of remembrance of Sasuke when he had killed his older brother as his first priority. It was eerily similar to what they were seeing now. Suigetsu lost the calm expression he had worn ever since the two of them had started arguing when he heard that sentence. It was replaced with a look of anger. I've got as much of a right as you do, Remo. So don't talk about rights in front of me. He shouted. What right do you have? You're a fucking traitor. You're probably more likely to join Kisame than fight him. But you're not going to help him. He's going to die for killing my dad. He stated. He was surprised when Suigetsu swatted the kunai out of his hand, making it fly across the room and the other wall, and turned the tables against him by twisting around, making him pinned against the wall. In case you've forgotten, Remo, your father wasn't the only one who died that night. My brother died too trying to stop Kisame from leaving, and your father was killed trying to stop them for some stupid misguided reason. Don't ever try to wave your father's death in my face when my brother did the same. Yugo, what's wrong? Karen asked her teammate. He was shaking slightly and his lips twitched, like he wasn't sure if he should grin or not. Then she noticed that the skin around his neck began to turn dark. Anko-sensei! She shouted in warning. Let me kill something, he muttered to himself. I want to hurt someone. Before he could anything else, a purple snake shot out of Anko's sleeve. It flew through the air and bit him on the neck. He went completely stiff and fell to the ground, landing flat on his face loudly. Both Suigetsu and Remo looked over at him when they heard him fall, their argument momentarily halted. Have you calmed down yet, Yugo? Anko asked her student nonchalantly. They had gone through the method of restraining his impulses so many times, it was practically second nature to them. Yes, I have, Anko-sensei, he answered, his voice muffled due to his face being on the floor. Even it had taken him longer to quell his instincts in the past. Once he felt the snake bite him, his body automatically reacted. He had been practicing quelling his instincts on his own, but the snake was always good for an emergency. Okay, now that everyone has calmed down some, Jiraiya said, looking pointedly at Suigetsu and Remo. Perhaps we can get back to figuring what to do. I've got an idea, Sokka announced. What we do is have 4 people go into the underground auction, while the rest of us hang back and make sure there aren't any interruptions. Once the 4 are inside, they wait for the swords to appear and then bid on them. Once they win them, they walk out and with any luck, Kisame and Kakuzu will follow. Who's going to go? Karen asked him. That would be Anko, Suigetsu, Remo, and Naruto, he answered, surprising the Kiri team. They were expecting only one of them to go, not the 2 who were more likely to fight than work together. Aside from FS Sensei, Anko has the biggest bounty here, which will get Kakuzu's interest. Suigetsu will let Kisame know that the swordsmen are after him and Remo will let him know that he's there for revenge. And we all know why I'm going, Naruto said, finishing off the tribesman's explanation. If we're sending in Anko because of the bounty on her head, why not send in Jiraiya? Suki asked them. It seemed logical to her. Jiraiya had the bigger bounty, and since Kakuzu had a sense of greed that defied definition, it would be the better trap. Mostly because if we sent him in, it's more likely they would be scared off than enticed them, the blonde explained to her. There are only a few shinobi who actually stand a chance against a Sannin and 2 of them are the other Sannin, although there's just one other Sannin now. Well, now that's settled, how are we going to pay for the swords, if we get them? June asked. That was the one part of the plan she thought they hadn't really figured out yet. Or so she thought. That's the easy part, Jiraiya told her. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small black book. I want this back and I expect it to only be used in the underground auction, he told Naruto, handing the blonde the book. Who the hell do you think I am, FS-sensei? You? He asked as he took the book from the Toad Sage. Are you sure he has enough money? Chojuro asked. He felt justified in the fact that if they didn't have enough cash, they wouldn't be able to get the swords. Losing treasures of the village because they didn't have enough money was probably one of the most embarrassing things that could have happened to them, not to mention getting on the bad side of the Mizukage, which was something he wanted to avoid. To answer his, fairly understandable, legitimate question, Naruto simply opened the book and showed its contents to the rest of the room. It turns out that little black book was Jiraiya's checkbook, and what was inside it stunned everyone. It is not possible to have that many zeros on a single page. June objected. Never in her entire career as a bounty had she seen such a large number in one spot. Both Azula and Suki nodded in agreement. The former princess of the Fire Nation wasn't quite sure of how much was in the royal treasury. She made a mental note to write a letter to Zuko and ask, but it looked like the number could easily rival or surpass what they had. Say what you will about the series, but Aika Aika sells, the blonde told them with complete seriousness. Aika Aika doesn't just sell. Aika Aika sells very well, Jiraiya corrected him. And yes, that does make all the difference. He answered the silent question they all had on their mind. Yeah, whatever, he replied with a roll of his eyes. Okay, now that we've basically figured this whole thing out, I'm going to do what I was originally going to do when I came in here. Any guy who went through the same ordeal, please feel free to follow. However, there's going to be a line for the toilet. He declared as he walked away from the room. With no hesitation, all the guys who had been a part of the seduction detail, aka mostly all of them, followed him. Later that night, Naruto sat on the balcony. He wasn't smoking, he just sat in silence. After the trip to the bathroom, he had changed into a shirt and a pair of shorts. He heard the glass door open, but didn't turn his head to see who it was. Do you need something, Azula? He asked her. Only you, she answered with equal parts seriousness and sarcasm. She walked over to his chair and sat down with him. The chair was roomy enough for her to do so, so neither of them was uncomfortable. Even if it was, they wouldn't have cared. Naruto, can I ask you something? It's been bothering me for a while now. Sure. What's on your mind? Why are you afraid of that Danzo person? When she asked that question, she could feel him tense up slightly. How could you tell? He asked her after a moment's silence. I know you just as well as you know me, she told him. So why are you afraid of him? He was silent for another moment before speaking again. Do you remember when I told you that your mother was one of the few people that I was utterly terrified of? How could I forget that day? She was still thankful that he had decided to show her and Zuko that their mother was still alive. Not only did it relieve their fears of her being dead, but Ursa also helped her daughter figure out her relationship with the blonde. Well, Danzo is another one of those people. When I was little, I lived in one of his orphanages. I was never offered up for adoption, I was the matron's slave in all but name, he began to explain. If I did anything wrong, I was beaten. And every week, he would come to visit me. He would teach me to read and write. If I got anything wrong, I would either feel his cane or be told how utterly worthless I was. I was told countless times how it was a great honor that he had chosen to teach me, but it sure as hell didn't feel like it. By the time I was 5, I had run away from the orphanage. As she listened, she began to hate the man for what he did to Naruto. Did he send anyone after you? She asked him. In all honesty, I don't know. If there was one thing I actually learned in that orphanage, it was how to make myself scarce. It took a week for the ANBU to find me and bring me to the Sandaime. He had been so terrified when they brought him to the office of the Hokage. After Gigi managed to coax the story out of me, he put me in the building the Konoha 11 now live in. And I lived there until I left. What happened after he put you there? I didn't know until the first night after we set out for this mission. I asked FS Sensei after everyone else went to sleep. Apparently, the orphanage I was originally placed in all too gladly sold me to the one I grew up in, and the reason Danzo kept visiting me was because he preparing to train me so I would become a shinobi under his command and obey only him. Once they found out that information, Gigi went to confronted Danzo about what had happened with FS Sensei right behind him. He then gave Danzo an ultimatum: if he ever came near me again, he was a dead man. He must have listened because I didn't see him until the day we were given the mission. Why would he listen to one Hokage when it looked like he obviously dislikes another? A blind and deaf man would have been able to see the opinion Danzo had of both Tsunade and Jiraiya that day. If he was like that to Hokage, why would he be any different to another? I asked that as well. It turns out that Gigi and Danzo were friends at one point, but it soured over time. I think I was the last straw for Gigi because, according to FS Sensei, that was the only time he had ever seen his sensei threaten a friend with death. The idea still surprised him. He knew that his Gigi was the Sandaime Hokage and thus, a shinobi. But whenever he thought of the man, he could only see the kind old man who gave him a home of his own and watched over him. I had nightmares about Danzo for a while afterwards. He was always there, watching me. It was like no matter where I tried to hide, he always found me with ease and always had that kami-forsaken cane ready to use. He suppressed a shudder. I was glad when I entered the academy. That's when the nightmares of him finally disappeared. He won't hurt you anymore, she promised him. I'll burn him to ashes before that happens again. Thank you, Azula. He was grateful for her promise. It was good to know that even though he was still afraid of Danzo, he wouldn't be alone in confronting him. A small part of his mind idly wondered if Jiraiya would stand by him as well. Ever since the Toad Sage had started training him again, his feelings of anger and distrust were gradually diminishing. And in all honesty, that scared him. Azula, what do you think of FS Sensei? He asked her. She looked at him with surprise on her face. What brought this around? She asked him. It wasn't like him to ask questions like that. Just humor me, please. She sat quietly as she thought it over. If I had met him as a stranger, I would think he was an oaf and a buffoon who spent too much time going after women or spying on them. But I also know that he is a powerful warrior with enough of a history and reputation to back up his word. And I also know that he is a good man, despite initial appearances, and a good teacher. She looked over at him. Why do you want to know what I think about Jiraiya anyway? It's nothing, I was just curious, he told her, trying to brush it off. She didn't buy it for a moment. If you're curious about something, you don't ask others what they think about it, Naruto. She replied, looking him in the eye. What's on your mind? I don't think I hate Jiraiya as much as I did before, he finally admitted. Isn't that a good thing? She might not know much about friends, something she was almost desperately trying to fix, but even she knew that liking someone more than hating them was a good thing. I wouldn't be so sure of that when it comes to the Konoha shinobi, he replied shortly. You're still trying to hold on to that grudge? Yes, I am. She would have rolled her eyes if this wasn't a serious conversation. Naruto, if you wanted to keep the grudge, you wouldn't have come to this side of the planet in the first place. We would have stayed in the bending countries. I had to come, I made a promise. Besides, we both know that the Akatsuki wouldn't just stay in the elemental countries. They would have come after me. I know, you decided to be selfless, she said with an annoyed sigh. You've always been like that, putting the needs of others above your own. What's wrong with being selfless? He asked her. In all honesty, he didn't see anything wrong with being selfless. The only time he hadn't was when he left the village. It doesn't hurt to be selfish once in a while, she told him. You've never considered what you want before what others wanted. You could have said no to the promise and stayed away. But I didn't. As much as I could have been selfish, I also wanted that snake bastard to die, even if that meant helping others before helping myself. But you didn't have to. You said it yourself, you would have been able to have gotten us out of the village within a week. She shook her head slightly. It amazes me that you would help Konoha out to kill a certain man, but you would still harbor a grudge against a few of their shinobi. What's your point, Azula? If you have begun to stop hating one of them, perhaps you could stop hating the rest of them, she suggested. And what exactly have they done to earn that? They've done nothing but chase after me since I left. When they found me, they kept coming after me despite my attempts to make them leave me alone. If they had left me alone, I might have forgiven them, and I stress the word might. If you don't want to forgive them, why do you interact with them? She asked him pointedly. That's mostly because you and the others keep badgering me to do something with them, he grumbled. Not to mention that the furball has been doing the same damn thing. Get over it, Kit, said Furball told him. The least you could do is talk to them. Naruto, even if we have been badgering you to interact with the Konoha 11, we did no such thing with you and Team Ebisu, Azula told him with a small victorious smirk. You did that all on your own. There was nothing really he could say in response, she had him there. If he thought about it, it was a way of apologizing to them for Kozan. What do you want me to do? Try and be friends with them? It wouldn't hurt. You taught me that. I don't expect you to be a hypocrite. You'd be surprised. I'm serious, Naruto. You have to try. He signed. I can't believe I'm having this conversation with you of all people. I was expecting to have it with Jiraiya or Sokka. You'll probably still will. Sokka might be especially pushy. They both knew Sokka was among the more vocal of people in the team trying to get him back on friendly terms with the Konoha teams. Quite frankly, she was surprised the two of them hadn't come to blows about it yet. He snorted as he stifled a laugh. I think that'll happen after he and Suki are done in the shower. Azula tried to stay serious, but she couldn't hold it. It was no secret about what the tribesmen and Kyoshi warrior were doing in the shower. They were all tipped off when Sokka wanted to go last for the shower, despite their attempts to keep it down. After they shared a quiet laugh, she fell silent for a moment. Hey, Naruto, I want to ask you something else. What about this time? It's about us. He grew confused and worried. What's wrong with us? Nothing is wrong with us, she quickly assured him. It's just, shouldn't we be doing more? All we've really done is held and kissed each other. His confusion and worry disappeared when he realized who she was unconsciously comparing them to. Are you seriously comparing our relationship to Sokka and Suki? Well. She trailed off, realizing what she was implying. The same two people who sneak off every chance they get so they can dance the bedroom tango? He asked her again. She began to squirm a little, making him smirk. The same two people who... All right, I get it, she cut him off, sprouting a small blush. She wasn't one to blush, but some of the things he said made her do so. Quite frankly, she hated it when he did that. Okay, yes, I'm comparing us to them. Please don't, I really don't want FS Sensei to hear about that one. Kami only knows what he'll say. It would only end with him trying to attack the Toad Sage, and end up with his head painfully pressed against either the floor or the wall. It's hard not to, she admitted. Sometimes it just seems that they're winning. He looked his girlfriend. The last time I checked, we weren't in a race against them. He could only say it with amusement. Azula still sometimes saw things as competitions. That was one of the main reasons why she wasn't allowed in the kitchens at the Fire Nation Royal Palace. Are you in that much of a rush to get into my pants? It's kinda hard not when I keep wondering what they're doing, she replied with both sarcasm and a little embarrassment. The images that kept appearing in her head whenever she thought about it were enough to make her blush, especially after she made the mistake, in her opinion, of reading a few chapters of Ika Ika, and she didn't blush easily. How do you not wonder the same thing? Probably because I'm not a virgin, he answered with a small shrug of his shoulders. Then he froze, having just realized what he said. I beg your pardon? She asked him, an accusatory tone filling her voice. Oh, Cammy, take it, he swore. I don't suppose that you'll be nice enough to forget what I just said. He was kinda hoping that she would, but he also knew that the odds were not in his favor in this one. He finally got his answer when he saw the look on her face. I thought not. Who exactly was the taker of your virginity? She all but demanded. Why exactly do you want to know? I want to know. Then I'm not going to be much help, because I really don't know who it was exactly, he admitted a little sheepishly. The memory still brought a slight blush to his cheeks whenever he thought of it. Apparently, she noticed the blush. I want details, now. She growled, straddling his waist and towering over him. Had this been any other situation, he would have the position they were in a little kinky. But it wasn't the time to comment on that. All right, but you're going to have bend down a little. She did so, and he began to whisper in her ear. As she listened, her eyes got wider and wider in surprise, shock, and simple amazement. And that's what happened, he finished. Did you really do all of that? It was the only thing she could ask him. She couldn't believe what she had heard come from his mouth. As far as I can remember, yes, he answered, a lazy and amused smirk on his face. Are we a little jealous? Yes, we are, she replied. You are mine, and no one else's. She then claimed his lips in a passionate kiss. That led to a hot and somewhat nosy make-out session that went on for quite some time. It finally ended when Jiraiya stuck his head out and told them to go to bed or he would put that little scene in his next book. They obeyed his orders rather quickly. Location: forest outside of Masu. 2 days later, the group who was going into the underground auction made their way into the forest. The mood among them was a little tense, and it wasn't just because of what they were about to do. Ever since the small shouting match the two had, Reimo and Suigetsu hadn't really said much to each other, mostly because they kept a sweet's distance between each other, and when they were in the same room, Chojuro was watching them like a hawk. In fact, the only thing they had really said to each other was regulated to things like, could you pass the salt? We're almost there, Anko announced as they leapt through the treetops. She held a map in her left hand, looking at it briefly before focusing back on where they're going. We'll descend to floor level and walk the rest of the way. She began to jump down to lower branches and the other three followed. They landed with practiced effort. Someone would have only heard them if they knew what to listen for. They walked through the forest, keeping quiet. After a few minutes, they came across a large tree that had a hole that was just big enough for a human to pass through. This is it, Naruto announced. He walked towards the tree and into the hole. After they saw him get in safely, they followed him one after each other. Once they were inside the tree, they found themselves on a staircase that spiraled downwards. They walked down the stairs, going deeper into the earth. They felt a chill surround them as they went deeper, but they ignored it. By the time they reached the bottom, if they hadn't trained themselves to ignore when it's cold or hot, they would have been shivering. Just in front of them was a tunnel, with a human standing in front of it. He wore a simple gray kimono, and had a katana at his side. You here to auction for something? He asked shortly. Yeah, we are, Naruto answered, stepping forward. The day before, they had decided that Naruto would be the spokesperson while they were at the underground auction. The main reason was because his constant refusal to wear a Konoha headband, which had started when he and Team Avatar were kidnapped, would mark him as a missing nin to most eyes. The guard's eyes roamed over the group. "Strange group," he commented. "Why should it bother you?" The blonde asked in return, his tone slightly accusing. The other three recognized the tone and shifted their footing, becoming more prepared for a fight. "It's just pretty odd to see shinobi from rival villages be together," the guard remarked, placing his hand on the katana. That was the only thing he did, but everyone could tell he was ready for a fight too. "Especially with you here," he continued, looking at the blonde. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Suigetsu asked him, joining in the conversation. "A missing nin with 2 Kiri shinobi and 1 from Konoha?" he asked rhetorically. "People will be suspicious." "People can go fuck themselves," Naruto told him. "We're here to auction for things your bosses are selling, that's all that matters." "Fair enough," the guard conceded, removing his hand from the katana and stepping off to the side. "Go ahead in. You'll be given a catalog once you actually get there." "Right, thank you." They walked past the guard and into the tunnel. Kisame and Kakuzu sat far back in the seats of what looks like a theater that was carved out of the rock. The stage was carved out like a gaping hole in the wall. If someone were draw eyes at the top, it would have looked very much like a monster roaring at those who would sit before it. The seats weren't carved out of the rock like the rest of the room, but were rather made out of wood and furnished with somewhat comfy pillows. The idea was that they were comfy to make sure you didn't squirm around, but not so much as to make accidentally fall asleep, which had happened once. "Full crowd," Kisame commented as he looked around the place. The seats were gradually being filled as people who stood around and talked began to look for open seats as well as people who came straight in and sat down. "It's always been like that," Kakuzu replied. Ever since they began traveling to the underground auction, he had been wondering why the ex-swordsman had come along. He didn't give any reason, not that Kakuzu asked him, he just decided to come along for the trip. Another annoyance for Kakuzu was the fact that if he went into of his rages, he couldn't just take it out on Haydn. It was a little aggravating, but he had several years of practice holding it in. "How long until the actual thing starts up?" the wielder of Samahata asked him. He was a little antsy, due to the fact that Samahata itself was locked away in a storage room. One of the more prominent rules about the underground auction was that before and during the auction, all weapons were to stay separate from their owners. The only people who were armed in the hall were the security people, and they had been trained to keep an eye out for shinobi and target them first. "It will begin in a few minutes," he answered shortly. Movement at the door caught his eye. It seems we have just become very lucky." "What do you mean?" The blue-skinned man looked at the door as well and saw an interesting sight. Naruto Uzumaki walked into the hall with 3 others. He made no attempt to hide himself, he just walked right on in. "Oh, I see your point." "That's not all, Anko Mitarashi is with him," Kakuzu said. You could almost hear his sense of greed filling his voice. She had quite the high bounty on her head. "And Suigetsu Hozuki too, his bounty a little small, but I'll take it all the same. I don't know who their 4th member is, so he's probably nobody." "Only to you, Kakuzu," Kisame said quietly. He knew who the 4th member was. In the back of his mind, he knew that this day would come. "Do you know him?" "Yes, he would be my darling nephew. And the last time he saw me was when I killed his father," he explained. Although his fellow Akatsuki didn't hear it, his voice had the slightest amounts of bitterness and regret in it. "They're here," Reimu quietly announced as they walked to their seats. As he walked, his was shooting his uncle with the most hateful glare he could muster. It looked like he saw it, because he couldn't keep eye contact every time he looked their way. "I think the rest of us can see that," Suigetsu said shortly. He was the one who had the catalog in his hands and looking through it with a nervous eye. Even though Naruto had told them that Nezumi spilled everything, he still had a nagging feeling that they wouldn't be in the catalog. "The 2 of you relax, if we want those 2 to follow us when this is over, we need to stay in here, Naruto told them as they found their seats and sat down. We know that, Reimu retorted. But he didn't take it any farther than that. His nerves were on edge, both from the fact that his uncle was near and the fact that the swords were close by. Do you think that they serve dango here? Anko asked, looking around. Is dango the only thing on your mind? Naruto asked her. It honestly looked like it to him. Then he remembered who she was dating, which made him shudder. On second thought, never mind. To calm his nerves, and to get the forming images out of his mind, he lit a cigarette and began smoking. Almost immediately, someone came up to them. Excuse me, sir, he said to the blonde. If you tell me that there's no smoking here, this is going to go somewhere that'll make you feel very uncomfortable, he threatened, holding the cigarette up for the guy to see. However, he didn't even bat an eyelash. I was going to ask if you would prefer a cigar, sir. He held out a box of cigars for them to see. Oh, no thanks, the blonde answered, a little embarrassed and trying to ignore the fox sniggering in the back of his mind. I'm good with the cigarette. In that case, sir, please remember to use the ashtray on the arm of your chair. He pointed at said ashtray and then walked away. Well, that was a little embarrassing, Reimu commented. Shut up, Naruto told him with a small glare. It was bad enough as it was, nobody need to make it worse. And not a word of you either. He silently told the fox. I found it. Suigetsu suddenly declared. A few other people looked at them, but the rest just ignored them. Apparently, they were used to spontaneous outbursts. I found the swords in the catalogue. He told them in a much quieter voice. Where are they? Reimu asked, looking at the catalogue. When he saw where they were in the catalogue, he frowned. We're going to have to sit through all of that? He demanded. It looks like it, Anko said as she took the catalogue and looked through it. Let's just be grateful that it's one of the last items on the list. Everyone heard the rapping of wood on wood and turned to face the stage. Standing at the podium was a woman. She dressed to impress, wearing a kimono that showed off of all her curves and in the same color as her highlights. Her lips were full and rosy red, forming a small smile that would have been illegal if it was on a younger girl. Welcome to the underground auction, she announced in a voice that everyone heard. The bidding will begin presently, please find your seats, and for those of you here who are not representing any of the families, please have your number paddle ready. Location, forest outside of Matsu. Sounds like it is starting, Karen commented as she watched the entrance to the underground auction. She, along with the rest of the teams, had followed at a distance. Once they had found the place, they hung back and kept watch, seeing if anyone would try to come in or out. They were also able to communicate with the inside team via wireless radios. The guards had let them pass with them on, as it wasn't uncommon for representatives to receive their instructions from them. There's no need to worry, Karen, Sokka told her, standing at the base of the tree she was in. All the shinobi in the group were amongst the trees, while the remaining members of Team Paragon were situated around the bases of the trees. They were scattered around, that way they could have a much better field of vision. Your boyfriend will be just fine. Suigetsu is not my boyfriend. She snapped at him. When he did say anything about Suigetsu? June asked her from atop of Nyla. Both she and Sokka had joined Anko in teasing Karen about Suigetsu. Quite frankly, it was obvious that the two of them liked each other, despite them trying to deny it by insulting each other and occasionally hitting one another. Oddly enough, the only one who hadn't said a word about it was Jiraiya. Karen's only response was to start banging her head against the side of the tree. The entire trunk managed to vibrate each time she hit it. I think she wants you guys to stop that now, Yugo commented with a straight face. Sorry, we can't help it, the bounty hunter replied with a smirk on her face, and not an ounce of apology in her voice. We need something to relieve the tension on a mission, and it gets boring sometime listening to Naruto and Sokka argue. Hey, don't mock our arguments. They're extremely important. Sokka told her with a glare. You don't even know who is winning, Azula replied with a roll of her eyes. If everyone could shut up for a moment, I can get into contact with the inside team, Jiraiya said, joining the conversation and effectively cutting it off. After everyone fell silent, he contacted the other team. How are we doing, Naruto? He asked through the radio. We've got confirmation on both the items and the targets, the blonde replied in a hushed whisper. Everyone heard him, having turned to the same channel to listen in. However, we're going to be in here for the long haul, since the items are among the last being auctioned. Just keep advised if anyone is coming in or out. Don't worry about us, you just keep your eyes on the prize. Talk about stating the obvious, FS-sensei, he replied in dry sarcasm before disconnecting. They all stayed silent as they waited for anyone to show themselves. For some, the waiting was the worse than the actual thing. Time would seem to stretch to an almost unbearable length. The one who had it the worst was probably Azula, if her fidgeting and clenching her hands were anything to go on. Everything will be fine, Suki assured her, having noticed her fidgeting. Why should it matter to you? She snapped. Sokka's not the one in there, is he? Don't start telling me that everything will be fine. She fell silent for a moment and then looked at the Kyoshi warrior. I'm sorry, you didn't deserve that, she apologized, meaning it. While she was still not used to apologizing for her actions, she tried to be sincere and not go overboard in the process. It's okay, I'd probably be the same way if Sokka was in there. She quickly glanced over to see if the tribesman was listening in. When she saw that he wasn't, she turned her attention back to Azula. Don't ever tell him I said that. He won't hear it from my mouth, she promised. But it's a little too late for that now, isn't it? She looked pointedly at the Kyoshi warrior, making her blush a little. Hey, what are you two talking about? Sokka asked, looking over at them. They could hear the curiosity in his voice and see in his eyes. Nothing, they replied in perfect unison. The curiosity turned to suspicion. But he didn't have the chance to follow up on that suspicion. Akela sniffed the air and gave him a quiet warning growl. He instantly went on the alert and looked around. His eyes locked onto a man who making his way to the tree. The others saw him, made sure to stay out of his line of sight. Once they saw him enter the tree, Sokka contacted the inside team. Naruto, someone's coming in. He began rattling off the details. Location, underground auction. They waited to see the man come in, ignoring the auctioning that was going around them. When the man finally entered, they all watched him make his through the seats. False alarm, Sokka, Naruto told him through the radio as the man finally sat down. He's not with the Akatsuki, just one of the families. Right, got it, the tribesman replied. We'll still keep a lookout. By the way, how are things going in there? We're in the double digits, that much I can tell you. I stopped paying attention after that, he answered before disconnecting the radio. He looked over at the others. Does anyone know what number we're at exactly? I think we're at the 80s, maybe, Suigetsu offered uncertainly. Other than that, I don't know. I think it's safe to say we now know why it started early in the morning, Anko commented. We're going to be here a while. We already established that fact, Reimu said shortly. Ever since they had sat down, his gaze had never left his uncle. If looks could kill, they would have lost count of how many deaths Kisame went through. Relax, Reimu, she told him, scowling lightly. I know it's going to be a while, I was just being sarcastic. Well, we really don't need it, right? Hey, if we keep this up, they're going to kick us out of here, Suigetsu reminded them with a pointed look. And we don't want. We just have to wait it out. That's why I brought this. Naruto pulled out the book he had been working on. Opening to the page he had left off at, he began writing again. While it honestly looked like he was writing, he was also keeping track of the people who were coming and going. As the underground auction dragged on, more and more people stopped bidding. The representatives were among the ones who bidded, but as the items went on, even they began to stop. Through all of this, the inside team kept track of the people who went in or out of the hall. So far, not one of them went near the Akatsuki members. "I'm beginning to think that nobody is going to meet up with the target," Anko said quietly into the radio. "So, we're probably going to strike out on the information pumping idea." It was a long shot at best, Jiraiya admitted. "I guess we'll just have to focus on the swords and the targets." "You mean we weren't doing that in the first place?" Naruto remarked, stubbing the finished cigarette in the ashtray. His remark made the others smile and also made Anko suppress a snigger. The Toad Sage didn't say anything in return, he just disconnected the radio. "Does anyone know where we are in the items?" Reimu asked. By his count, they had already been in the hall for a good 4 hours, there weren't clocks anywhere in there, and he didn't have a watch, so he was mostly guessing. As if to answer his question, the lady at the podium, who also was the auctioneer, made the announcement they've been waiting for. Item number 2962, the remaining 4 swords from the 7 shinobi swordsmen of the mist. The swords were pushed onto the stage behind her. They rested in glass cases, so that everyone could see them. When Reimu and Suigetsu saw them, they both gave a small sigh of relief. "The opening bid is 10,000 ryo, do I hear 10,000? One of the men in the front raised his hand. "The representative of the Kinkuchi family bids 10,000. "Do I hear 15,000? Another man raised his hand. "The Chitetsu family bids 15,000 ryo. "Do I hear 20,000? Time to join the game, Kisame thought to himself as he raised his paddle. "Number 120 bids 20,000. "Do I hear 30,000? "We need to get in there," Suigetsu said in a whisper. "Already on it," Naruto replied as he raised the paddle in hand. "Number 97 bids 30,000 ryo, the auctioneer said without missing a beat. "Do I hear 40,000 ryo? A third man from the front raised his hand. "The representative of the Teko family bids 40,000. "Do I hear 50,000? "Kisame," Kakuzu said shortly. "I know," he replied, raising his paddle. "Number 120 bids 50,000. "Do I hear 100,000 ryo? The auctioneer asked the crowd. Most people were glad to have silently made the decision to stay out of the bidding for this item. Even the representatives who were bidding for it were now considering backing out if the price would get any higher any faster. Their bosses hadn't given them any direct orders on obtaining the swords, but they mentioned an interest in getting them. Currently the only ones who were interested in the swords were the Akatsuki and the inside team. Nevertheless, Naruto responded by raising his paddle. Number 97 bids 100,000. "Do I hear 200,000 ryo? The auctioneer asked the crowd. "I can stay in a bit longer," the first man thought to himself as he raised his hand. "The Kinkuchi family bids 200,000 ryo. "Do I hear 300,000? No one answered for a moment. 300,000 going once, going twice. Kisame raised his paddle. Number 120 bids 300,000. "Do I hear 400,000? Naruto instantly raised his paddle. Number 97 bids 400,000. "Do I hear 500,000? Taking a risk, the representative from the Chitetsu family stood up. "I bid 2 million ryo," he declared. Everyone looked at him in surprise. That was high number for certain. "The Chitetsu family bids 2 million ryo, the auctioneer said calmly. "Do I hear any other bids?" "Ha, I can top that easily," Kisame thought to himself as he stood up. I bid 200 million Rio. He announced loudly. People were now looking at him and began whispering to themselves. What are you doing, Kisame? Kakuzu asked him, a small amount of anger and fury entering his voice. While his greed was well known, Kakuzu was also known for being incredibly stingy. He hated losing any more money than that absolutely needed. It was this conversation that usually led to him going into one of his rages. I'm making sure that they come after us, he replied, looking over at the four in question. What the hell are we going to do? Reimu demanded in a harsh whisper. There's no need to worry, Naruto assured him with a lazy smirk. If Kisame thinks he can beat us with a big amount of money, he's about to be sorely mistaken. Gaki, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, don't you dare, Jiraiya ordered through the radio. Relax, FS-sensei, he replied. It's not like you won't be able to afford it. Number 120 bids 200 million Rio, the auctioneer said in a matter-of-fact tone of voice. Do I hear any other bids? No one said a word. What are you waiting for here, Naruto? Suigetsu asked him, getting agitated. The right moment to tweak their noses, he replied with nonchalance. 200 million going once. The auctioneer said. 200 million going twice. That was when the blonde decided to stand up. I bid 800 billion Rio. He announced in a loud voice. If the people in the hall were surprised by the prices before, now they were downright shocked. No one had ever bided for something on that high of a price. When Jiraiya heard the price, he could only groan in misery. Number 97 bids 800 billion Rio. Do I hear any other bids? 800 billion going once, 800, 000, 000, 000 going twice, 800, 000, 000, 000 going 3 times, sold to number 97. She declared, banging her gavel. Gaki, I'm going to murder you, the Toad Sage threatened the blonde through the radio. Chapter 58, Gaining and Taking. Location, Kakuzu and Kisame. They sat in the seats of the underground hall. Everyone else had pretty much left once the underground auction had been finished. The families who were in charge this year were packing up and getting ready to leave. Are we going to leave now? Kakuzu asked. His patience had run out. Yeah, let's get going. Kisame replied. After the underground auction had ended and the successful bidders went to claim their prizes, a message had been given to them. It was a simple message that read, "We'll be waiting." They had decided to wait until they were sure everyone that wouldn't be involved was out of the way. They didn't need any more confusion than was absolutely needed. Toby got annoyed when that happened. They rose from their chairs and walked out of the hall. In silence, they walked through the tunnel and up the staircase. The day was in the afternoon as they came out of the tree. In front of them were 2 trees, each had an arrow carved into it, pointing in the opposite direction. Pinned above to the arrows were pieces of paper. The one on the right read, "This way to the bounties." The one of the left read, "This way to the swords." Looks like they want to split us up, Kisame said with a grin. He was looking forward to the fight and quite frankly, he didn't want Kakuzu to be in the way. If he had to guess, they had thought of the same thing and were being considerate. It wouldn't matter if they were trying to get us both or trying to separate us. His fellow Akatsuki member replied. Their bounties are mine and I will tolerate no opposition from that goal. And that includes you. He told the wielder of Samahata. He could only grin wider at that. He knew that Kakuzu wouldn't hesitate to kill him and quite frankly, he wouldn't either. The difference was that he would a slightly more difficult time against one of the zombie combo than the other way around, but that would only make the fight more enjoyable for him. That's fine by me. Odds are I won't see you later. Goodbye, Kakuzu. He walked past the tree that pointed to the left. Kakuzu didn't watch him leave, but went past the tree that pointed to the right. He knew that he wouldn't die. He would claim those bounties and collect the money. Perhaps he would be able to cash in on Kisame's bounty as well. Location, Team Paragon. They've split up, Naruto announced, opening his eyes. His clone had just dispelled, passing the information to him. Kakuzu coming this way and Kisame went the other way. It's been a while since we've had a good fight, Azula commented, readying herself for the upcoming fight. Ever since they had come to help get rid of the Akatsuki, she didn't really have a good excuse to use her bending, aside from sparring, and she couldn't really let loose there. You did read the report on him, right? Suki asked her. Due to the fact that they were going up against S-rank missing means, they read the reports Orochimaru had written about the Akatsuki members he had known, so they didn't know anything about Tobi. To the Kyoshi warrior, Kakuzu was one of the more unnerving ones. Of course I did, she replied. That just makes me even more excited. Please don't rush into the fight, Azula, Naruto told her, his tone slightly pleading. They were about to fight a guy who had more than the mandatory amount of hearts, who had lived during the time of the Shodaime Hokage, and would probably go after his own mother if the bounty was high enough. I really don't want you to lose your heart to this guy. She managed to smile both sarcastically and warmly at him. It's nice to know that you care about me. Could you two do that later? June asked them. She didn't mind, or even care, if they decided to act lovey-dovey in their own way when they had time. But when they were about to get into a fight that could cost one of them their lives were not really the place for that kind of thing. Of course, it also reminded her that out of the entire Team Paragon, she was the only one who's single. When this is all over, I should probably start looking for a boyfriend, she thought to herself. June is quite right. Jiraiya agreed from the tree branch he was sitting on. Keep the displays of affection to when we're done here. You know, when you said going to murder me, I thought it would have been by your hands, Naruto remarked with a grin, looking up at the toad sage. Shut up, Gaki, he snapped, a little irritated. I'm still mad at you. Do you realize how much money you cost me? This was one of the reasons he didn't let anyone take a look at what was in his checkbook. Another reason was so that Tsunade couldn't go on a drinking binge. It's not you couldn't afford it. You've got much more than that, the blonde replied. Besides, we both know you're putting the finishing touches on your latest Ika novel, so you'll probably get all the money back without a problem. It's the principle of the matter. I give you my money and I expected you to be careful with it. Instead, you blow a whole chunk of it. He rolled his eyes. Look, if it makes you feel any better, let's call it payback for when you took my money and wasted it when we were looking for Tsunade. The only difference here is I wasted your money on something useful. The only response Jiraiya could give him was a glare that could have burned a hole through multiple trees. No, the difference there is that you got your money back. And you will too, once you release the next Ika novel. Guys, you're going to have put this fight on hold, Sokka told them as he opened his eyes, put his shoe back on, and drew his Zanpakuto. He's here. They all went silent at the announcement. Within a second or two of his announcements, Kakuzu walked into the small clearing. Very impressive, he commented, looking at the water paragon. I'm surprised you don't have a bounty on your head. I probably used to have one on the other side of the planet, the tribesman replied offhandedly. He was never sure if he did have one, considering he was the only non-bender in the group and the Fire Nation had been more worried about Aang, and made a mental note to ask Zuko about that. It doesn't matter in the end. What? You can't have the bounty, so you're going to take my heart instead? He went still when he heard that. You know about that, don't you? He asked. It was a rhetorical question, but one he needed to hear the answer to. You can thank the snake bastard, Naruto told him, saying snake bastard in a growl. He wrote some good reports on you guys. I see. He stood in silence before clasping his hands in a seal. Then let's skip the pleasantries. With pleasure, Azula said with a light in her eyes as she slipped into a stance. Defend your kingdom of snow-covered forests, Kuroga. Sokka intoned, his Zanpakuto splitting into two. Both he and Kakuzu charged each other, swords meeting fist in a loud clang. They stood in the middle of the clearing, trying to move the other person. Location, Kisame. He walked through the forest. He didn't have his hand on Samahata's hilt, but he knew that he was either walking into a trap or a fight. If he was a betting man, he was more of a rigger, he knew what he was walking into. It'll be interesting to see how they fight together. He thought to himself. That thought was followed by a bittersweet one. Reimu has grown. Before he had left, he always had a bit of a soft spot for his nephew. The kid always said that he would join the swordsman and take Samahata from him. As he thought about his nephew, the night that he left unconsciously came to mind. He could still see Kenji's body on the ground, the side of his head bashed in from a blow by Samahata. This isn't the time to think about that, he said to himself as he walked into the clearing in front of him. In front of him were Chojuro, Suigetsu, and Reimu. You took your sweet time, Suigetsu commented. He had folded his arms, like he didn't care about what happened next. What can I say? I enjoy a good walk, he replied with a shark-like grin. So, are you going to try and capture me? Bring me back to Kiri and face judgment? Lady Mizukage has already passed judgment on you, Chojuro told him. He hadn't folded his arms, but instead let them hang down at his sides. They were loose, ready for the upcoming fight. You are to die by our hands and our swords. He managed to restrain the urge to snort in disbelief. You really think you snot-nosed brats have a chance against me? Your brother tried the same thing, and he died, he said to Suigetsu, pointing at him. He said nothing in return, but his face turned into a scowl. What were you planning to do with the swords, Kisame? Chojuro demanded. Would you believe me if I told you I was going to send them back to the village as a gift to your new Kage's reign? He asked with false innocence, lowering his arm. I'd think we can all agree that would be complete and utter bullshit. Ah, well, I had to try, he said with a grin. The grin faded when he looked at his nephew. How have you been, Reimu? He asked. Why the hell do you care? His nephew snapped. While his arms hung at his sides, they were tightened up. His hands were clenched and almost looked like they were shaking. In his right hand was a kunai. I can't be curious about how my nephew's been? Lighten up, Rai, you're too serious, he told him, using his childhood nickname for the kid. When he was younger, Reimu would always get annoyed and told him that his name was Reimu, not Rai. You lost the right to call me that the night you killed my dad, Kisame. He spat. He wanted to attack him right then and there. But he knew that wouldn't do much good. Even though he didn't show it, Samahata's wielder flinched slightly. That was an accident, Reimu. I swear to Kami and on Samahata, I never meant for that to happen. Whether you swear it or not doesn't matter. It happened. And now, I'm going to kill you. He couldn't help but laugh. And with which sword will you do that with, Reimu? Will it be Kiba? How about Shibuki? Maybe you'll use Kabutawari? Or perhaps Nuwabari will be the one you will wield. Which sword will it be? He was actually curious about it. If Reimu was with two of the swordsmen, that meant he was being considered for one of the swords. I told you a long time ago that I would take Samahata from you. And I meant every word of it, he reminded his uncle. It was that dream that kept him going through the years of loneliness, beatings, suffering, and humiliation from both his peers and seniors. To take Samahata from his uncle's cold hands and become one of the 7 swordsmen. He couldn't help but grin when he heard that. Well, here it is. He drew Samahata, who seemed to quiver in excitement for the upcoming fight. Come and take it. Hiramakari Kaiho. That was Suigetsu needed to charge him, drawing Kubikiribocho. With a shout, he swung the blade down at Kisame's head. Instead, it met Samahata. The sound of the swords clashing against each other seemed to ring throughout the forest. Both Suigetsu and Kisame wore grins that bordered on manic. I've wanted to do this for a long time. Suigetsu told him with glee. Then I shall gladly provide. He replied. Using his superior strength, he pushed the Hozuki clan member back. Suigetsu instantly responded by pushing back. The two struggled to move the other, putting their all into it. That is, until Kisame suddenly disengaged. He pulled his sword away from Kubikiribocho, making his opponent stumble forward. Grasping his sword in 2 hands, he swung down at Suigetsu, intent to cleave him in 2, or at the very least, bash his head in. Despite what happened next, he wasn't surprised when Suigetsu turned to water and Samahata passed through him. A shadow fell over him, and when he looked up, Chojuro seemed to hang in the air. Hiramakari Kaiho, Hiramakari unleashing. He shouted, holding his sword high as the bandages came off. Chakra came forth from the 2 holes in the blade and formed into a blue hammer. He swung down, aiming for Kisame's head and back. Impressive timing, Gaki, Kisame told him. But also stupid. Spinning his sword with a speed a stranger would think he didn't have, he swung it onto his back just as the hammer came down on him. It struck the sword, making it quiver. The hammer faded away as the chakra holding its form was eaten. You should have known that it's always a bad idea to use chakra-based attacks against a wielder of Samahata. Chojuro landed on the ground in silence, his blade still locked with Samahata. We do know that. Suigetsu told him as he reformed with his sword still in hand. That was so I could have enough time to do this. He swung Kubikiribocho hard and fast at Kisame's head. But while he may have swung hard, he didn't swing fast enough. Kisame caught the sword with free hand, with almost contemptuous ease. While blood did drip from the hand, Suigetsu couldn't make Kubikiribocho even budge. That was just pathetic, Suigetsu. Samahata's wielder told him with disdain. I expected you to do better than that. Suigetsu only smirked in reply. What's he smirking about? Kisame wondered. When he heard the sound of feet charging, he got his answer. He tore his gaze from Suigetsu, and looked up to see Reimu charging straight at him. Still charging into things, he thought with some nostalgia. And here I thought you had changed. When his nephew had gotten close enough, he pushed Samahata forward, catching Reimu in the stomach. Scales burst through the wrappings on the sword and tried to pierce his chest. Suiton, Mizudepo no Jutsu, Water Style, Water Gun Jutsu. Suigetsu took one hand off of the hilt of his sword and fired a round of water at Kisame's face. The blue-skinned man saw it coming and jerked his head out of the way to avoid it. Only getting a graze on his broke his concentration long for Suigetsu to tug his sword free and knock Samahata away from Reimu, tearing the scales away. Suiton, Mizurappa, Water Style, Wild Water Waves. Chojuro, having been able to disengage from Samahata, flashed through the hand seals and spewed forth a jet of water out of his mouth, directing it at Kisame and forcing him to use his sword as a shield. Even though the water pounded uselessly against Samahata, which ate the chakra that created it, both the sword and its wielder were pushed back away from the Kiri shinobi. Are you hurt, Reimu? Suigetsu asked him as they regrouped. I'll be fine, it didn't draw blood. He answered. It may have hurt somewhat, but he was able to ignore it so long as he focused on the fight. You were wearing mesh armor underneath your clothes, weren't you, Reimu? Kisame asked, hefting Samahata onto his shoulder. The graze on his cheek healed and faded away within a matter of seconds. That's very smart of you. His gaze focused on all of them. However, I can't say the same for your plan of attack. Calling it adequate would be generous. We're just starting here. Suigetsu told him. Location, Team Paragon and Kakuzu. That's a hell of a grip you've got. Sokka commented as Kakuzu held his Zanpakuto tightly. You wouldn't happen to be using Doton, Domu, Earth Style, Earth Spear, would you? The fact that the skin on his hands and arms had darkened had tipped off the tribesman. And how would you know that? His opponent asked him. Like Naruto said, the snake bastard wrote some good reports on you guys. He answered with a smirk. He made sure to write down all the jutsus you use. He even described the effect of the jutsu in great detail. It won't help you. Even though you know what the jutsu is, you cannot escape it. Besides, why bother asking me about it if you already knew what it was and what it could do? He asked as he tried to put more pressure on the pair of swords in his hands. Try as he might though, he couldn't cause them to break. Actually, you're wrong about the first thing. Sokka told him as he pulled his Zanpakuto out of Kakuzu's grip, slicing his palms open. As for the second thing, I wasn't saying it for my benefit. He dropped to the ground and rolled away, as the sound of lightning filled Kakuzu's ears. Fry his ass, Azula. Naruto ordered. His girlfriend heeded his words and directed the lightning she had been generating straight at Kakuzu's heart. It flew from her fingertips, towards his body, and pierced his heart, tearing through the other end. He went stiff as the lightning entered his body, and when it vanished, he fell to the ground. That's one down. Jiraiya commented from his branch. Due to his anger at Naruto for spending so much of his money, he told them that he wouldn't join the fight unless things got out of control. It was met with minimum complaint, mostly because they were no strangers to fighting without his help. In silence, they watched as Kakuzu stood back up. Very impressive, you lured me into using an Earth-style jutsu, so you could exploit its weakness. He applauded them. It seems that those of you that have bounties on your heads will probably be worth it. As for those of you who don't have bounties, I'll try to remember your names. You make it sound like you've already won the fight. June remarked. It was a little weird to hear him say something like that, if she had to be honest, although she would never admit it out loud. He had gotten a bolt of lightning though his heart, fell down dead, and then just got back up, speaking like nothing had happened at all. It's only a matter of time until you're all dead. He told her. But I may have to be a bit more serious than usual if I want to claim those bounties. He reached up to the zipper of his cloak, and began to pull it down. Once it was at the bottom, he shrugged the cloak off and tossed it away. By the spirits, Suki said in horror when she saw what was under the cloak. She had to fight down the urge to throw up at the sight. And I thought Orochimaru was disgusting. Sokka commented with disgust. Kakuzu's skin was covered in enough sticks that made it look like he was sewn together. On his back were 4 masks, with the one that was positioned over where his heart was supposed to be was completely shattered. Before anyone could say anything else, his back ripped open and what could only be described as black blood poured out from it, carrying the masks with it. Now, shall we begin? Kakuzu asked as 4 monsters-like creatures with the masks for faces stood behind him. It was a little intimidating and anyone else would probably have run away at the mere sight of the monsters. Even shinobi would feel unease when looking at them. And even though they were a bit disturbed by what they saw, the members of Team Paragon did not allow it to overwhelm them. You might want to wait on that thought. Naruto told him with a bit of glibness, looking at the one with the broken mask. The creature in question collapsed to the ground and looked like it melted, leaving only a large puddle. Okay, I think it is dead. The blonde said. We can now resume the fight. June took that as a command. She leapt from atop of Nyla, both she and Sokka had had decided to keep the Shirshu and wolf out of the fight, and drew her whip. "Come on, big fella, let's dance," she told the creature that had the wings attached to its body. It responded by trying to swipe her through her midsection. She danced away and stung it with the end of her whip. "You're gonna have to be faster than that," she taunted it, spinning low and cracking the whip against one of its legs. Both Suki and Saka had decided to fight Kakuzu himself. The two had often sparred against and with each other, so they knew how to work together. When Kakuzu tried to focus on one of them, the other would distract him. They never stayed in one place as they fought him, they always kept moving. Ducking, leaping, turning, and attacking, they kept moving, never letting him get an easy target. Growling in anger, he finally clasped his hands together. "Katon, Zukaku, fire style, searing migraine," he snarled. At his side, the creature with the red lips opened its mouth, and an immense amount of fire poured out, flying towards the two. "Oh no, you don't," Azula said. Bending her own fire into existence, she bent it at the jutsu and cut it off. The two different kinds of fire clashed together, trying to claim dominance against the other. They swirled around each other, twisting and curling against one another before the brief conflict was won by Azula, who was able to keep up the stream of fire while Kakuzu had to cancel the jutsu lest he wanted to die from chakra depletion. When she saw that the jutsu had been cancelled, Azula didn't gloat. She pressed the attack, bending her fire at the creature. "Raiton, John, lightning style, false darkness," Kakuzu said as he clasped his hands in a hand seal. The creature with the yellow-nosed mask opened its mouth and fired lightning at Azula. But Naruto had stepped into the path of the lightning. He took a waterbending stance and let the lightning hit him right on the fingertips. "I guess chakra-based lightning is different than bender-generated lightning," the blonde thought to himself, gritting his teeth as the lightning entered his body. The pain he felt was sharper than the pain from lightning a bender would have given him. But he was able to focus on what to do instead of the pain. "June, line them up," he shouted. The bounty hunter heard his words and began to lure the winged creature towards his line of wood, crack her whip against it, and backed off when it tried to attack her. "Anytime now would be great," he told her as he struggled to hold the lightning in and not let it destroy him. "Just give me a minute. This is not exactly easy," she shouted at him as she twisted to the side, avoiding a swipe from the creature. "Just a little bit more, and perfect." She twisted her head to look at him. "Okay. You can discharge now." "Thank you." He redirected the lightning at the winged creature and let it loose. As the lightning flew towards the creature, June leapt out of the way. Meanwhile, Kakuzu had taken notice of this. "I guess he's not as smart as Itachi said he was," the Akatsuki member thought to himself with a small smirk. "Doesn't he know that wind beats lightning?" He clasped his hands again into a hand seal, albeit a different one. "Futon, Atsugai, wind style, pressure damage." Compressed wine spewed out of the winged creature's mouth. It crashed against the lightning and engulfed it, rendering it useless. It flew on, barreling towards Naruto. Kakuzu thought he had him, until the blonde suddenly ducked down and rolled out of the way. "What?" he thought in surprise. But then he realized what he was planning. He didn't forget that wind beats lightning. He lured me into using a wind-style jutsu when he directly in front of my lightning heart. He urged the lightning creature to get out of the way. It managed to do so, but the jutsu clipped it, taking out the entirety of its left arm. "Damn it," Naruto swore as he and June got back up on their feet. "And here I thought we had it." It had their plan to take out two of the hearts within the opening minutes of the fight. That way, Kakuzu would be down 2 hearts as well as 2 chakra styles. "Well, we'll just have to try again," June remarked as she charged back into the fight. How much you want to bet that the others are having an easier time than us right now? He asked aloud, following her. Location, Kiri team and Kisame. How much you want to be that the others are having an easier time than us right now? Suigetsu asked his two other teammates as he panted slightly. The fight against Kisame was lasting longer than they were expecting or preferred. The mere fact that Samahata kept taking their chakra was something of a hindrance. Not to mention the hilt could be extended, allowing Kisame to use the sword like a flail. Do we look like idiots, Hozuki? Reimu asked back with slight annoyance. He was too focused on the fight to be properly annoyed by what Suigetsu has said. We need to figure out a way to get Samahata away from him. Thank you for that statement, Captain Obvious. The wielder of Kubikiribocho replied with blatant sarcasm. Obvious or not, he's right. Chojuro told him. If they could get Samahata away from Kisame, the danger of having their chakra taken would disappear. But the problem was that if they tried to take it away, there was a good chance that the sword would try to get back to Kisame. And if they tried to wield it themselves, it would pierce their hands in order to get free. You know, I'm fairly certain that you three were supposed to fight me, not run away and hide. Kisame said aloud as he got closer to where they were. They had fallen back and regrouped to think of a way to win the fight. So far, they didn't have anything. Come out, wherever you are. I guess we'll have to oblige him if he wants to taunt us like that. Suigetsu said with clenched teeth. Before the other two could object, he leapt out of the tree he was hiding in and charged at his opponent, his sword ready to be swung. When he was about to strike Kisame, he twisted low and aimed for his feet, intending to slice his target's feet off, or at the very least, knock him to the ground. Nice try. Kisame thought to himself. Swinging Samahata low, he not only managed to block the strike, he sent Suigetsu skidding away. Suitun, Suikoden no Jutsu, Water Style, Water Shark Bullet Jutsu. A shark made of water formed around his hand, and when he pointed it at the white-haired shinobi laying on the ground, it surged forward towards him. For a brief moment, it looked like it would hit him. Of course, that was when reality came back into play. Suitun, Suidan no Jutsu, Water Style, Water Bullet. Reimu cried. A torrent of water shot out of his mouth and slammed into the water shark, knocking it into a nearby tree. Both jutsus collapsed when they made contact with the wood, turning into a small cascade of water. The ground around the tree was soaked within a matter of seconds. Next time, wait for us. Reimu yelled at Suigetsu. We need to work together as a team. Don't lose your frigging head. I heard you the first time. He shouted in return. Standing back up with Kubikiribocho in hand, he charged at Kisame again. This time, however, both Reimu and Chojuro joined him in the fight. They all attacked Kisame together. While Suigetsu and Chojuro had worked together before, Reimu had not. So they weren't working in complete tandem. It was more like a mostly successful dance. When Reimu saw a chance at attacking his uncle, he would try and take it. However, it sometimes interfered with what either Suigetsu or Chojuro were trying to do, forcing them to back off to avoid a swipe from Samahata or improvise. Meanwhile, Kisame didn't really move from where he stood. He made the occasional step to either block or attack. But that was it. He knew that they wouldn't dare risk using jutsu against him, as Samahata would either render the jutsu useless while also take their chakra in the process. He relied on that fact, forcing them to back away every time he tried to hit them with his sword. He was enjoying this fight. He honestly couldn't remember the last time he had even gone against even one of the other 6 swords, much less 2 of them. As Reimu swerved and ducked to avoid a swipe from Samahata that would have sent him flying, he was trying to think of a way to get an edge on his uncle. Suitun, Mizudepo no Jutsu. Suigetsu said, pointing his finger at Kisame's face. A round of water shot from his fingertip and sailed through the air. It would have hit him, and mostly likely have put a hole through his head, had he not used Samahata to block the shot. That gave Reimu an idea. "Suigetsu, grab his free hand," he shouted. Suigetsu was mystified, but did as he was instructed. He reached out and grabbed Kisame's free, dragging it close the semicircle in Kubikiribocho's blade. He was intent to make the wielder of Samahata have one less hand. Kisame noticed and tried to yank his hand free. It was in that moment when Reimu made his move. Drawing his father's kunai, he lunged forward and plunged it into the hand that held Samahata. What happened next would seem longer to Reimu than it actually was. Hissing in pain, Kisame unconsciously released his grip on Samahata. The sword fell to the ground and landed with a sound that seemed to echo in the surrounding forest. They all stared at the sword in silence for a long moment before they all moved. Suigetsu shoved Kisame back away from the sword while Chojuro kicked it away. Scales pushed out from the wrappings as it landed, making it look like it had grown legs. It scuttled back towards the struggling Kisame, intent on rejoining its master. When Reimu saw what the sword was trying to do, he leapt for it and grabbed it by the hilt, skidding on the ground as he maintained his hold on the sword. "Guys, I've got Samahata!" he cried out. Both Chojuro and Suigetsu immediately backed off of Kisame, and leapt towards his side. Kisame smirked slightly as he stood up, pulling the kunai out of his hand. "Do you think that because you have Samahata, you have an advantage over me?" he asked them, making them have looks of doubt appear on their faces. The look of doubt on Reimu turned to pain as he yelped in pain and surprise. "I see Samahata doesn't like you, nephew. You might want to let go of it now." Like hell," he roared back, even though his body was agreeing with what his uncle was saying. He could feel Samahata trying to get free, the scales biting into his hands. In the back of his mind, he could feel a sense of anger, outrage, and desperation. Like the sword was angry at him and wanted to leave, but couldn't. He tightened his grip on the sword, but that only made the scales dig deeper into his hands, letting the blood drip to the ground. Both Suigetsu and Chojuro noticed the blood dripping. "Guys, you take care of Kisame," he told them with gritted teeth before they could say anything. "I'll keep them separated." "He's not letting go?" "That's a first," Kisame thought to himself in surprise. Most people that Samahata didn't like would have let go of the hilt within a matter of seconds. But Reimu still held it, even though it was evident that his hands had pierced. "I have to give him credit," he silently acknowledged as Suigetsu and Chojuro attacked him again. "He's lasting longer than most people." But there was something else about Samahata when it was held by a person it didn't like. If they didn't let go, the sword would drain them of their chakra. Reimu would let go of Samahata. He would lose his life, and Kisame would regret it, but he would let go. It was only a matter of time. Location: Team Paragon and Kakuzu. It had taken them a while, but they had managed to take out the lighting creature via a very creative use of a wind jutsu from Naruto, fire bending from Azula, and Sokka's boomerang. They were now down to 2 hearts, and it didn't look like it was going to be easy taking them out. "I don't think I'll be able to something like that again," Sokka admitted, panting slightly. His use of his Zanpakuto was beginning to get to him. It was one thing to use it in a spar, it's another thing to use it in an actual fight. The rest of the group agreed with him. They had been cutting it close with that last tactic. They didn't want to admit it, but the fight with Kakuzu was getting more and more horrendous as time went on. Even though they had taken out 2 of his hearts, he acted like that didn't slow him down. Oh sure, he was angry and promised to take their hearts, but he was just threatening them, calmly. "We need to take him out with one blow," June said. She had been fending off the wind creature throughout the entire fight. While she knew the forms of the other 3 bending arts, she had stayed with the one she was most comfortable with, the one her grandfather had all but beaten into her. The only time she had strayed from the airbending forms was when the creature tried to attack Nyla. She beat it back with an aggressive use of fire-bending forms and would have gotten hit by either Kakuzu or the fire creature, she wasn't sure who, had Azula not pulled her out of the way and returned fire with her own bending. Anyone got any ideas? I've got one, Naruto admitted. Before he could give it to them, Kakuzu decided to interrupt them by landing in their midst. Before he could reach out and grab hold of anyone, they all scattered and backed away. Out of the forest came his two remaining creatures, moving quicker than you would expect from. Everyone focused on their targets, Naruto switching out with Azula so she could join the fight against Kakuzu himself, drawing her daggers from her belt. You know, when I once told you that you must enjoy playing with fire, I'm pretty sure I didn't mean this. The Kyuubi pointed out from inside the blonde's mind, watching as he dodged a swipe from the creature. I'm pretty sure I was talking about Azula. That's actually the same basic thing, Fox. He replied as he threw a kunai at the creature, hoping to distract it as he got behind it. Both are likely to set me on fire if I ever give them a very good reason to be pissed off. And I'd say I already did that with Mr. Creepy here. He took a step back to avoid a claw aimed for his head as the creature turned around to face him. If he had to hazard a guess, the kunai didn't work. Futon, Daitapa, wind style, great breakthrough. He breathed a gust of wind, aiming it at the creature. It traveled fast and slammed into the creature's midsection. It wasn't enough to tear it in half, just enough to send it flying it back into a leapt for it, hoping to break the mask. But when he saw that it got back up and was ready for him, he made a clone to throw him out of the way. Had you ever considered the fact that you might not be the best choice for fighting this thing? The fox asked him. The only elemental jutsus you know are wind style, and in case you haven't noticed, this thing uses fire style. Oh, trust me, I've noticed. He silently answered. He glanced over to where Sokka was trying to slash Kakuzu's legs. He had seen what the tribesman had been working on with his Zanpakuto. The only reason he hadn't used it on Kakuzu was because he wasn't sure if he could be fast enough. Sokka, switch out. He told him. The water paragon looked over at him for a brief moment. Are you sure about that? He asked, ducking a punch from his opponent. Just do it. You're probably the only one fighting who take this creature down in one shot. They silently counted down, pivoted, and leapt for the other's target. Naruto landed with a high kick and created a clone, the two of them setting into his Tsuinkan twin fist. They worked together as one, even though they used opposite bending forms. Sokka never stayed still for his target, mixing waterbending forms with airbending forms. Both he and Suki did it to Kakuzu, always moving, taking Kakuzu's strikes and turning them against him, allowing them to strike. He applied the same idea against the fire creature. He danced, ducked, stabbed, and slashed. It didn't do much damage to the creature, more like irritated if the expression on Kakuzu's face was anything to go by. Too close for comfort. The tribesman yelped as he rolled away from a jutsu the creature used. Would you stop dancing around and take that thing out already? Azula yelled at him. While Naruto and his clone were working together, she and Suki were doing the same thing. They weren't really pushing him back, but he wasn't them away. For all intents and purposes, it was a stalemate. I thought Aang was the one who did all the jumping around. Would you give me a minute, please? He shouted back at her as he slashed at the creature's side. This is the first time I'm using it in real combat. There should be less talking and more doing coming from you. He held his tongue, even though he had a very, and he meant very, sarcastic response. Leaping back to put some distance between him and the creature, he took a solid stance and breathed deeply. Garo, hungry wolf, he said, swinging his Zanpakuto down in a cross slash. From the space where the two swords had crossed, a spectral wolf appeared, and leapt for the creature. With a speed too quick to be seen by untrained eyes, it tackled the creature and began to rip it to pieces. There was no hesitation in its actions and held no mercy in its eyes. The wolf tore chunks out of the creature and swallowed them whole. The creature tried to struggle, but the wolf's paws held it down. As more and more of its body were eaten, the struggles lessened. Finally, all that remained was the mask, which broke in half once the wolf stepped on it and faded away. "What was that jutsu?" Kakuzu demanded. Everyone else, including him, had stopped fighting to watch what would happen. He could feel the heart in the fire creature be torn apart as he watched the wolf devour it. "It's not a jutsu," Sokka told him, keeping his swords ready. "It's a move used with my Zanpakuto. It creates a spectral wolf that will stop until it eats its target to the last piece." What he neglected to mention was that he wasn't sure if it would work on spirits or jutsus, the former because he wasn't that dumb to try and the latter, he hadn't tried yet. "And I believe it just took out another of your hearts," he reminded the Akatsuki member with a cocky grin. "Wow, he just completely ignored lesson number 4. The QB commented as he listened to the explanation. "To be fair, he doesn't know what lesson number 4 is." Naruto replied. "That would be your fault, not mine." The fox admonished him. All right, remind me to explain the lessons to Suki, Sokka, and June when I have the chance." "Indeed. Nobody has ever taken 3 hearts from me," Kakuzu admitted. "That just means I will just have to take 3 of yours and kill the rest." The only remaining creature leapt towards him, entering his back. The blackness of the creature turned to gray strings, sticking out from his back. Strings also burst out of his mouth, which made the mask he wore fly away. It made his arms elongated, breaking the strands that held them together apart. He went from looking someone who had an immense amount of surgery to someone who looked like he was a puppet that had his strings cut. Above his head, the mask of the wind creature appeared in the strings. "Whoa, and I thought he was nasty before," June commented. Even though the guy looked a lot scarier, the bounty hunter, an air paragon, wasn't quivering in her boots. In fact, she looked like she didn't care what the guy looked like. "So, anybody want to take him?" "I got it," Naruto declared, dispelling his clone. "I actually enjoy taking guys like him out." Holding out his hand and concentrating, he began to form a Rasengan. Once it was fully formed, he focused his wind chakra into, creating the 4 blades spiraling around the blue center. They never seemed to comprehend the very idea of lesson number 9. He shouted over the sound of the air being cut. "What kind of jutsu is that?" Kakuzu asked himself. "It doesn't matter in the end. So long as I avoid it, I will be safe." He watched in silence as the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi charged straight at him, jutsu in hand. If he could, he would have smirked. What a complete novice, he thought to himself, thinking lowly of the blonde. All I have to do is jump, now. Now. He leapt into the air, just as his opponent went past him. But unbeknownst to him, that was exactly what Naruto wanted him to do. Sucker, he thought in triumph as he quickly skidded to a stop and pivoted around. Futon, Raisin Shuriken, Wind Style, Spiraling Shuriken, he cried as he threw the jutsu up into the air, watching as it slammed into Kakuzu's back. And the fuckers goes flying. The blonde shouted in triumph as the jutsu carried his opponent upwards. What he didn't know was that when he was about to throw the jutsu, Kyuubi added a bit of his chakra to it, stabilizing it as well as making his host's eyes briefly turn crimson, although no one noticed this. They all watched in silence as the jutsu carried Kakuzu high into the sky, cutting him in half as they went. But he was already in so much pain that he didn't notice. As he was engulfed in a sphere of wind, his mind went blank. He felt he was being pierced through countless times by countless swords. He only realizes that he had lost his last spare heart when he saw the mask of the wind creature shattered into pieces and get swept away in the wind. When he felt his last heart getting torn apart and realized that he was dying, he only had enough time to think, how could this? As the sphere of wind finally faded away, the group just watched as the two parts of their opponent crashed to the ground with a meaty thump. And that takes care of him, Azula declared triumphantly. Nicely done, everyone, Jiraiya congratulated as he walked out of the forest. The fight had covered a lot of ground, and he hadn't moved from where he sat during the entire fight. You've successfully taken out a member of the Akatsuki. With any luck, that'll hinder them a good amount. I hope so, June replied. She walked over to where Kakuzu's head laid. The bounty people on this side of the planet just need the head, right? She asked as she bent down and grabbed the head. Yeah, pretty much, the Toad Sage answered. Good to know. She walked over to Nyla, who had followed Jiraiya to the group along with Akela, with the head in hand. Pulling out a sack from Nyla's saddle, she dumped the head into the sack. Twisting it close, she secured it on the saddle. Same as always, right, June? Naruto asked with a grin. It disappeared and was replaced with a brief look of surprise as Nyla tried to sting him with his tongue, making him duck and roll away. That was a compliment, you blind excuse for an overgrown rat, he shouted at the Shirshu as he stood back up. I swear, your mother was a rock that got humped by a badger mole. As much fun it is to watch you two plays around, we need to get moving, and let the others know that we're done, Sokka informed them pointedly. He looked over at the wolf in the group, who was sitting on his haunches and waiting. Akela, could you please tell the others? The wolf lifted his head and howled. Location, Kiri Team and Kisame. Despite not having Samahata, Kisame was still able to fend off both Suigetsu and Chojuro. He used the kunai that Reimo had stabbed him with as well as a spare one from his pouch. It may have been more than a few years since he fought without Samahata, but as long as he waited for Reimo to let go, he would be just fine. While he dueled against the wielders of Hiramakari and Kubikiribocho, his nephew was fighting with the Samahata itself. The blade kept trying to free itself by wrenching itself free of Reimu's grip. But his hands held on with a steel grip. This made the sword lengthen the scales that were embedded in his hands, causing him more pain. The blood that had dripped from his hands now flowed. Forget it, he growled quietly at the small voice that was pleading him to let the sword go. When he had first grasped the hilt, the voice had ordered him. You're not going anywhere. The sword's response was to try and throw him at a tree, but because of his grip, it went with him. Reimu, you okay? Chojuro asked as he took a quick look back at his teammate. I'm fine. Don't worry about me, just focus on Kisame, he answered as he got back to his feet. Even though he said that he was fine, he did not look it. His skin had paled and his brow was caked in sweat, making his hair damp. If a stranger had walked by at that point, they would have thought he was wearing red gloves. But he didn't pay attention to the pain. He just focused on his idea. You will submit, Samahata, he silently promised. The sword seemed to hear, as it tried to get free even more urgently. If you want to live, Reimu, then let go of Samahata, Kisame told him as he blocked a strike from Chojuro and avoided a jutsu from Suigetsu. If he had to be honest, he didn't want to see his nephew die because he was stubborn. Hell, he was still fond of him. The fact that he was considered for the Seven Swordsmen had made the Akatsuki member proud. You should be less concerned about Reimu and more concerned about us, Kisame, Suigetsu told him, swinging Kubikiribocho up from the side. It missed Kisame's head by 1 or 2 inches when he leaned his head slightly to the side. He retaliated by thrusting the spare kunai into the hole of the sword. His intent was to hold it there in deadlock. However, that was not Chojuro's intent. Hiramakari Kaiho, he cried, bringing his sword down over his head. The shape the chakra took wasn't that of a hammer, but of a longer sword. When Kisame realized that his hand and a good portion of his arm were going to be chopped off if he didn't pull it away, he did so quickly. Hiramakari flew through the space where it had been, hitting nothing but the air. "Kami, take it," he swore, stopping the swing before it embedded itself in the earth. Hey, watch it!" Suigetsu yelled at him. The Hozuki clan member had stumbled backwards when Kisame had broken the deadlock. The swing would have done serious damage to him if he hadn't pulled back in time. Before anyone said anything in response, a howl echoed through the forest. That's funny. I would have thought all the animals in the forest would have run away after the sounds of battle," Kisame noted as the howl faded away. He knew from experience that a forest during or after a battle was virtually devoid of animal life. Then he remembered something. That was the white wolf, wasn't it? He asked the other 3 shinobi with him. "Yeah, it was," Reimo answered in a strained voice. He was sweating harder than before, and it was obvious that he was trying to stop his hands from shaking. And yet, it seemed odd that, even though he looked like he was weakening, Samahata wasn't struggling harder to break free. In all honesty, it looked like it was struggling less. "If the others managed to win against your friend and kill him, they would signal us with Akela's howling. Kakuzu isn't my friend. He was simply another member of the Akatsuki," he told his nephew before looking him over. "You look a little pale there, Reimo. You sure you don't want to let Samahata go?" "I told you already. I would take Samahata from you," he replied. "Why would I give it back to you now when I have it in my grasp?" As if it had hurt him, Samahata lengthened the scales embedded in his hands. He couldn't help but scream in pain as the scales burst through the other side of his hands. "That would be why," Kisame answered simply. "And if you're not going to let go of Samahata, then I guess I'll just have to take it from you." He leapt over both heads of Suigetsu and Chojuro, catching them by surprise, and charged directly at his nephew, kunai ready to fight. Suiton, Mizudepo no Jutsu." Suigetsu fired off multiple rounds of water from both hands at the blue-skinned Akatsuki member's back. But he was running in a zigzag pattern, so the rounds missed. "Kami, damn it all," he swore, grabbing the hilt of Kubikiribocho and charging forward, still firing off rounds with his free hand. "Come on, Chojuro. Don't even try it." Kisame spun around, flashing through hand seals. Suiton, Suikoden no Jutsu, Water Style, Water Shark Bullet Jutsu. Another shark made from water surged from his hand and swam through the air, making both Suigetsu and Chojuro leap to opposite sides of it. The shark decided to go after Suigetsu, who turned to water to avoid its teeth. It disappeared when Chojuro smashed it with a blue chakra hammer, courtesy of Hiramakari. But as they did that, Kisame reached his nephew. "Give me the sword, Reimo," he ordered. "No way in hell," Reimo growled. He tried to swing the sword, but couldn't get it halfway through the swing before his arms went limp. The tip of Samahata fell to the ground, followed by his legs. "You're not taking it back," he said in small gasps as he sat against a tree. "I need it." "That's where you would be wrong. You do not need it. You want it." He reached down to grab Samahata. "Now give it to me." "No," he said as he tried to lift the sword, only for his hand to drop. Trying to focus, he raised the hand again and with a grunt of effort, threw Samahata away weakly. The sword spun once before landing onto the ground. "I knew you would value your life more than the sword." The Akatsuki member reached out and ruffled his nephew's hair. He stood up and looked over at Suigetsu and Chojuro, who watched him in silence. "What? Are you guys going to wait for me to be ready? That's not very shinobi-like of you." They didn't say anything in response, they just watched him. Deciding to ignore them, he walked over to Samahata and reached down to pick it up. But when he grabbed hold of the hilt, he got a nasty surprise. Scales sliced his hand open, forcing him to let go. What the? He thought in surprise. Scales also came out through the bandages covering it, landing on the ground and pushing the sword up off of it. It was then that Kisame got the biggest surprise he could ever have had. Samahata, for the lack of a better word, hissed at him. When it tried to scuttle past him, he lunged for the hilt again. Suiton, Mizurapa. Chojuro spewed a jet of water from his mouth, forcing the Akatsuki member back away from the sword, making him drop the spare kunai he had in the process, allowing it to keep scuttling. When it reached Reimu, the hilt extended and placed itself with an almost gentle care on his hand. As soon as that happened, an orange glow engulfed the hilt and the hand. Immediately, Reimu's breathing got better and the holes in his hands began to heal. How is this possible? Kisame demanded as they all watched Samahata heal his nephew. Suigetsu smirked. I guess his gamble paid off. He answered smugly, hefting Kubikiribocho onto his shoulder. What do you mean? He means that this was the plan all along, Kisame. Reimu told him as he stood up, completely healed, and with Samahata in hand. I wasn't just holding onto Samahata so that you wouldn't have it. I was deliberately pumping my chakra into it, all the while willing it to submit to me. He couldn't have been more surprised. You mean you risked your life force-feeding Samahata your chakra so it would like it so much, it would choose you over me? He couldn't help but ask. That seemed like one of the dumbest things anyone could have done. And yet, his nephew had pulled it off. It was a gamble. He admitted. But it was one I was willing to pay if that meant you would lose your greatest asset. And it worked. He lifted Samahata up and pointed it at his uncle. The fight is over, Kisame. Give up, and give me back my father's kunai. He commanded. Kisame's response was to throw said kunai at his nephew and leap backwards. Suiton, Daikoden, he began to say as he landed, going through the necessary hand seals. But before he could finish, Reimu, who had caught the kunai with ease, leapt after landed and swung Samahata once. Kisame felt his chakra disappear from his control. I'll say it again, the fight is over, Kisame. Reimu repeated as he placed Samahata on Kisame's neck. Both Chojuro and Suigetsu did the same thing with their swords, forming a triangle around him. Then I guess I'm out of luck. He replied. They all knew he was. He couldn't try to fight against three of the swords, not without one of his own, which had just been taken from him, and he had a suspicion that the rest of the swords weren't there. His time had come, and he wasn't going to try and fight against it. Well, at least I had a decent fight before I died. His nephew wasted no time in relieving him of the belt that had carried Samahata for its wielder. Get on your knees. Suigetsu ordered him as Reimu turned away to put the belt on himself. Kisame did as he was ordered, kneeling on the forest ground with his back straight. Do you have any words to say before your execution? Chojuro asked him. Even traitors who were being executed were allowed the right to say something before they died. Yes, I do. He turned to face his nephew, who had turned his back. Reimu Touken, I am proud that it is you who has succeeded me with Samahata. Therefore I, Kisame Hashigaki, hereby order you to bear the title of Kirigakure no Same with pride and honor. Reimu didn't say anything in response. He didn't even turn to face him. And Samahata, I want you to keep an eye on Reimu. He continued. Kami knows he's going to need it. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I am ready. He declared, opening his eyes and bowing his head slightly, showing the back of his neck. Suigetsu raised Kubikiribocho over his head and swung down. With that one swing, he beheaded Kisame Hashigaki. It's done. He declared as the head fell to the ground. Chojuro pulled a bag out of one of his pockets and placed the head inside of it before twisting it shut. "Let's get going," Reimu declared, still looking straight at the forest. "We need to regroup with the others and let them know what we have done." The other two silently agreed with him. They quickly hid Kisame's body underneath a tree, burying it in dead leaves and branches. When they were finished, they left in silence. It was their plan to come back and properly deal with the body once they had regrouped with everyone else. That area of the forest was quiet for a good 5 minutes. Then, what appeared to be a large Venus flytrap in an Akatsuki cloak stepped out from behind a tree. If someone was to look closely, they would have seen that there was a head in between the flytrap. The left side was white, while the right side was black. "Well, this is a problem," he said as he stood in front of where Kisame's body had been hidden. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.